You can justify top secret platforms like spy tech, like stealth programs, stuff like that. That's all justified for obvious national security reasons. In my opinion, and I'm not an attorney either, but I would take up that case myself. And I would argue in a court of law that you cannot justify the secrecy behind a undeniable proof of extraterrestrial life visiting this planet. So then for the government to turn around and to try and prosecute somebody for that, for showing proof of what the government has denied, I don't buy it.
Chris Lado, welcome to Lado Files.
Okay, welcome to Lado Files. I have a very exciting show tonight. I'm a Patreon member of John Greenwald. I'd recommend everyone join his Patreon. He actually puts out a lot of great content, behind-the-scenes stuff, and his FOIA requests have been world-renowned. He's actually been making FOIA requests since he was 15. Can't believe that, since 1996 when he started the Black Vault. So I'm sure most of my audience should know John Greenwald right now. Thank you so much for being here, John. Thanks for your time.
Oh, of course. It's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So how did you get into UAPs? I mean, you were into UFOs at that point, I'm guessing. Is that correct?
Just from a curiosity standpoint, but yeah, and that's where I started my FOIA journey, so to speak. I deal with all sorts of government secrets. In fact, I posted not too long ago that kind of a fun but often forgotten fact is only about 10%, if that, of my 3.3 million pages on the Black Vault now deal with UFOs and UAP. You know, like that, less like in single digits of percentage. And a lot of people just don't realize that this is a massive archive. But UFOs and UAP is where I started. It's really what the Black Vault is known for. And to be honest with you, it's one of my favorite topics, if not the favorite, that I've had over the decades, just because of what it is, what it entails, and the amazing amount of evidence that actually has come out to support that whatever these phenomena are, they're incredibly real, and the government is lying through their teeth about them, which leads into kind of my skepticism of today's conversation. Like, what's going on here? You know, why has this conversation changed? And it's an interesting and fascinating and exciting topic, and it's one that I've always loved.
And I guess most 15-year-olds aren't building their own websites, you know, especially back then. 1996. So I graduated high school in 1996. I mean, the internet was pretty new. So you just always liked cutting edge technology, or?
I did. Yeah. I started on the internet, not to really age myself, when America Online was version 1.0 for DOS. And I remember my grandmother, who has sadly long since passed away, but she taught me how to use the internet back then. And at that time, I think I was only like 13 or 14, if I remember, and was kind of, you know, experimenting with chat rooms. And, you know, that's all the internet was back then. But I was always fascinated by it because I realized it was such a powerful tool. You know, it was fun for a teenager to go in and, you know, meet new people and talk and stuff. But there was something more to it, even at that time. And HTML, I think, was also in version 1.0. I had taught myself how to program in that language just to kind of have fun. And before the Black Vault was born, I was already programming like just a regular personal homepage that had military aircraft stuff on it. I was such a fascinated kid by that. I loved it. Grew up going to air shows all the time. So what I would do is I would, you know, grab my favorite aircraft and put like really cool, you know, photographs online. It was, you know, it was a 1995-ish website, so it wasn't impressive at all. But for me, it really taught me programming. It taught me how to design. I did graphics design even back then. I found some screenshots of stuff from the Wayback Machine, even all the way back through the late 90s, of what the Black Vault looked like. And man, it's come a long way. But I've always been fascinated by that. And because I realized it was that powerful tool that, yes, it was fun. Yes, it was entertaining. Yes, you can get lost and do things that meant nothing to your life, but also you could learn and you could teach and you can spread information. And that was the power of it for me even back then. And it's only strengthened through the decades to see how powerful the internet really is.
Yeah. You mentioned there, you just started doing it. You're interested in learning, and really that's probably the main reason I started a YouTube channel, you know, just to get out there, to force myself to learn new things, you know, which I'm learning every day, you know, how how to hook up StreamYard in this on the road and do these interviews and everything. So I think it's important to get out there and actually learn by doing.
Yeah, that's right. I've always been an advocate for, if you want to learn for something, just jump in and learn it and go for it and don't hold back. And that for me was the internet and learning how to program the web pages. But as the Black Vault grew, it was going from a couple pages to a couple hundred pages to a couple thousand to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. Now I've got 3.3 million. It's tough to run a website that powers that. It's one thing to have files, but it's another to try and organize with different indexes and pages and try and figure out what is the best way to do this with various features and search engines and so on and so forth. I'm telling you, man, you can get lost trying to learn more and more and more because you can never stop. I mean, you could just sit here and do it 24 hours a day and learn all the different aspects of all the now present day, all the different languages of all the different models of all the different scripts of all the different programming languages and so on to make something like that work and still not learn at all. I mean, there is so much to it at this time. It really is amazing.
And yeah, you mentioned the Black Vault. So now you said 3.3 million. I guess, is that web pages? Is that what that is? Or
those are pages of government documents, and then those 3.3 million pages and various PDFs are then programmed in through tens of thousands of index pages and stuff like that.
Wow. Yeah, I can only imagine. And you mentioned that it's not all UFOs. That may be the part you like the most. On Twitter or X, you had just recently posted from 2001 that the CIA had your name down. And it was interesting because it wasn't about UAPs, if I recall. It was about a submarine, et cetera. Is that an example of something not UAP related, or was that actually like a UFO UAP request?
No, had nothing to do with it. In fact, there was in that CIA document I posted nothing about, I think in one of them they did mention UFOs, but for the most part, they were saying that I was dealing with, they did say UFOs, but essentially what they labeled as multiple conspiracy theories. But the examples that they gave were actually not conspiracy theories, but rather showing the secrets that the government truly keeps, not because I think and I have a theory about something, but truly are keeping these secrets. For the one that you just mentioned, the submarine, this was about the sinking of the Kursk, the Russian submarine Kursk. And yes, years ago, I had gotten really attached to this story. It was a tragedy. I mean, you had if memory serves, I'm going back quite a few years, but there was a little over 100, I believe, sailors that were trapped and then ended up all dying when the Kursk sank. And the rumor was that it had collided with an American sub. They often were playing, especially through the Cold War, but even post-Cold War, essentially these games of chicken with these nuclear submarines. And I'm only laughing because that's terrifying to really think about. But there are true documented incidents that, again, are not conspiracy theories, that we were having these chase games, under the ocean with these subs between Soviet and later Russian submarine commanders and American vessels. So the rumor was that we potentially hit it. America hit it with one of their subs, or vice versa, they hit us, but then a cover-up ensued. And around this time frame, there was an American vessel that had to dock in an emergency basis. So there was a lot of other facets that started to support it, that we had potentially played a role. But of course, America's version, wildly different from Russia's version. So who do you believe? I mean, Russia's known for lying too. So I'm not trying to side with the Russians here. But my whole point is that I went after documents, right? So all those conspiracy theory, whatever aside, I was going for records pertaining to the sinking of the Kursk. And to this day, here we sit in 2023, arguably all of it is still classified. There's only been a select few things that have come out. I've got a webpage that's specifically dedicated to that incident. And you can see the secrecy is still there. So if this was just a tragedy, and of course there's going to be layers of national security to this. What did we know about the Russian submarine? Where was it? Why was it there? Sure, some of that stuff can be redacted, and I get that. I mean, I'm an advocate for transparency, but I also understand secrecy and the need for it. So I can see some of it. But for me, after investigating it all these years, I think there's a much more to the story. I think that there's definitely something more to it. So not to go off on a tangent on the Kursk, but that's just one example of quite a few that I've gone after over the years, just simply because the government is not truthful about the majority of things that are out there. And when they want to talk about something, that terrifies me, because it's like, wait a minute, you have not wanted to talk about this for decades. All of a sudden you want to start talking? That's when my red flags go up. And that obviously specifically to the UAP stuff. But I'll deal with it all. I'll go after any and every government secret you throw my way.
I guess, and so do you think, or from your experience, you just mentioned there, they don't want to share anything. How do you feel about the redactions, where they can just write the black over, do you think they're actively suppressing information that they shouldn't be?
There's no doubt in my mind. Yeah. At first I was going to ask you, what topic are you talking about? But it doesn't matter what your answer would be. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind they are engaged in overclassification and trying to hide the reality of a lot of topics. Now, specifically, your audience is probably wondering, am I talking about UAP related stuff? That more so than most, actually, this day and age. And I get a lot of heat for saying this, but this is the reality. The secrecy is strengthening on UAP and UFOs more than any other time that I've been around using FOIA, but arguably even prior to that. Now, the reason I say that is just because they're muttering the words UFO and UAP, and we see congressional language and stuff like that, all of that is great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to shy away from the importance of that. But the secrecy behind UAP material, especially in the last 4 to 6 months, has clamped down to a point that is terrifying for anybody that wants UAP information in the open. And I believe that's provable beyond any shadow of a doubt. And often the heat that I get is, well, John, FOIA is useless. You're not going to get anything. The history aside of what FOIA has produced, that's a different argument altogether. But when it comes to the secrecy and the exemptions through FOIA, the same secrecy is going to apply to any congressional push for transparency also. And even though they mandate releasing information, for example, Schumer's bill about the UAP, whatever they call it, that's actually a bad thing. Transparency is good. But if you read between the lines of that bill, I think as it's worded, as you and I speak right now, it would actually be a bad thing, because they are clamping down on this information. We've seen it now through legal means, through FOIA, but I believe we'll also see it when Congress pushes for transparency also. And I'll close the thought with this. The prime example is the JFK Assassination Records Review Board, which the newest kind of push to get all the JFK records released. And to make this point short, it's believed that, and it's said that, the UAP initiative to get all this stuff out in the open, get it declassified, is modeled after that. So we can, by history, go back and look at that and say, okay, well, how did that turn out for us? And it didn't turn out good. We got some information about the JFK assassination, and that's great. A lot of new stuff came out, and that's great. But the promise or the aim to release everything, they fell way short of that. And it's in the tune of thousands of pages that are still withheld in their entirety. So it doesn't matter if they release 20 million pages of information, although that's great. If the truth, the real truth, is hidden in that less than 1% of the pages that they still withhold, then what's the point? And that's what I fear about this newest bill, that if they're saying, hey, this is the model, well, that's not off to a good start already. But then when you look at the language itself, there are some very worrisome things here that I think coincide with that secrecy that I think is deepening. And some of what they call themselves UFO activists out there, they're cheering this on. And I'm here to say it's probably not going to turn out the way people think. So if it passes as it stands right now, I hope to be proven wrong, but I don't think it will be good in the long run.
I guess what would you like to see? I guess what would be the main difference? You don't like the review panel? You don't like the fact that there's, I guess, the panel to review it, or just the JFK as an example? They did base it off the JFK release.
I mean, if you show me who's on the review panel, I can answer that.
Okay.
As it stands, though, right now, I mean, we'll take the eminent domain part of it.
Yeah.
And I think that people hear that and go, yeah, the government's going to go to private sector corporation X and they're going to grab all that UAP material. Well, if you keep reading, they essentially will not only confiscate it and claim it as their own for the greater good of humanity or whatever the wording is, they will then later decide whether or not to tell you about it. It's that fine print part that's not even in fine print that kind of worries me. And I think it's great that they want to go, the government wants to go in and really find the answers here. But I don't think a review panel modeled after something that we know sided with secrecy over transparency is going to work. So who's going to be on that review panel? I saw what the intent, what the kind of the intention overarching angle is for such a review board, but will it turn out to be that way? Who knows? And obviously people are going to have to get read in if they're not read in already with security clearances and stuff like that. And the proven model is, not to beat the dead horse, secrecy trumps transparency. And that's what I worry about. What I'd like to see is accountability. I'd like to see, and this is going along the lines of momentum here with the recent UAP hearing, but also those in the last year and a half plus or so. Let's get some people that get grilled like I see in hearings outside the UFO arena. And, I'm one of those geeks that watches some of those things. Like they don't have to deal with UAP or UFOs. I like those hearings. I like when they start duking it out. Not because I, want to make it all Jerry Springer, but on the contrary, I think that that's the heat that needs to be thrown at people that are heading the agencies that we've seen obfuscate the truth about UAP for decades. And even though they may not have been in their position decades ago, they are the head of those agencies respectively now. So let's throw that same heat in there and start asking those questions. Mm-hmm. With respect to Dr. Kirkpatrick, my kind of point here is when you look at that hearing, although I don't think Gillibrand should have been rude to him or really aggressively push for answers. I feel that there were very much they were very much softball questions. I don't think Kirkpatrick was pushed at all. And how can you get pushed when only two senators show up and a third waltzes in and asks a single question or two and then leaves? I think that there has to be push. There has to be heat. And again, this isn't asking for anything that's out of the ordinary. You see this in other types of hearings. So why not in UFOs and UAP? So it seems to very much be this tread very carefully, come in. So what did you see, Dr. Kirkpatrick? What do you need? Okay, I'll work on that. And that's it. Well, at this point, he's been working long enough to let's push a little bit harder. And the same is true for those that are making big claims, like the David Grusches that may show up at future hearings, and David Grusch himself at the last hearing. Again, not trying to make this a Jerry Springer show, but rather really push and really dig into what he's saying and getting the 40 witnesses or so that he says that he's talked to, getting them in front of those committees, getting them under oath, and having those people bring these stories forward. But that's where I think the heat needs to be turned up.
Yeah, I agree fully. It just seemed very softball questions. Kirkpatrick, yeah, I still don't know. What did you think of his letter? The letter he wrote after the hearing.
I was a little surprised to see it, to be honest with you. I was surprised because usually people that are involved in government programs like that are completely mum, right? They're silent. They rely on public affairs officials and spokespeople to do the talking for them. And that's what Arrow/Dr. Kirkpatrick has done since day one. So for this thing to show up on LinkedIn and someone sent it to me the night prior to it being acknowledged, to be honest with you, I just thought it was fake. I just thought, okay, here we go again. That's some leaked document, and I'm pretty skeptical about those things. Like if I can't prove provenance right up top, my skepticism is leading the charge on it, and admittedly it did on that. But when I woke up the next morning, and I think it was Dean Johnson who had verified it with Dr. Kirkpatrick directly, and I've known Dean a long time and trust his word, I was like, wow, okay, this thing is real. The fact that he was speaking for himself, again, that's where the surprise came in. And what I would love to ask for clarity on, because I've seen it kind of go a couple different ways when he was saying that the source of the claims refused to talk to him.
Yes.
Some people thought he meant that was David Grusch. Some people thought that meant it was people saying they were being threatened. So I've kind of seen different interpretations of that, and I don't think it's ever been solidified who he was referring to. I'd love to push a little bit on that. Who's not talking to Arrow and why? And if they're afraid, then that's where, again, that accountability comes in a hearing where a senator like Kirsten Gillibrand can come in and essentially, this is probably the wrong word, but mediate a little bit. Be that middle person that if she trusts Dr. Kirkpatrick and then whomever source, or if it's Grusch himself, refuses to talk to Arrow because they're tainted or they don't trust them, then let's get a senator in the middle and try and figure this out. And I hope that that's happening behind the scenes, but I think that there needs to be a little bit of clarity on what, Dr. Kirkpatrick means, because if there are sources that are, again, there's a couple different ways that this can go, and correct me if you've heard differently, but let's say he was referring to a source that David Grusch has, and he refuses, or he or she, this source, refuses to talk to Dr. Kirkpatrick, then we should find out why. Is it because Arrow is tainted? They don't care? What? There needs to be some kind of reason given on why. So I think that there's a lot of variables here, and if it's David Grusch, then that kind of contradicts a little bit of his testimony that he was there waiting for Dr. Kirkpatrick's call, but never got it. So I lean towards the fact that it was whatever anonymous person or people that were saying that they were being threatened, and that they had this knowledge, they were afraid to come out, that they were afraid to talk to Arrow. And I can partially understand that. So I'm not knocking it at all. But if that's the case, I don't know if telling somebody else, then having that somebody else come out and kind of essentially give that third hand recollection of it. I don't know if that's the right way to do it. That there should be more whistleblower protection for those individuals. And maybe if they stay silent, I wouldn't like that. But if that's the case, have them stay anonymous. I'm sorry if I misspoke and said silent, but stay anonymous, but then speak through a whistleblower protection, because that's obviously there, not only in regards to UAP specifically now, but also whistleblower protection in general. So I'd like to see something like that transpire.
Yeah, and just about whistleblower protection, I was lucky enough to be at the hearing. I got to go. That was one of the main things I took away from that is, we're just not protecting the whistleblowers. It really seems like they're not getting protection. And then today, basically news breaking is that Grusch will have his medical records were essentially leaked, right, to a newspaper that will publish about his PTSD, right?
Yeah.
And looking at that case, I don't think it's that big a deal. I guess it doesn't harm his character, in my mind at least, that he has PTSD or that it's in his past medical records. But the fact that it came out, I think, is a huge shot across the bow to all these other potential whistleblowers. That it more as not necessarily to get Grusch, but to basically punish Grusch, or to show everyone else that, hey, if you come out and start talking, this is what's going to happen. We're going to publish your medical records, which is, getting your medical records is very difficult. Like my wife can't go get my medical records. They will not give it to her. They're super hardcore. You know how the government works. It's like a steel trap. Getting your medical records is not like some easy thing to do. So the fact it was leaked is really surprising to me, actually, that it got out. And I feel it more as like an attack on future whistleblowers. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the whole case?
I was let down to see it. I mean, obviously the claim has been made that the government did it. Specifically, Ross Coulthart said the intelligence community did it. Those are huge claims to make. And if there's evidence to support that, then I'm all interested to hear that. But for me, and I posted this on social media and I'll say it again here, it doesn't matter who's wielding this tool to use his medical records and his PTSD background as a veteran. That to me is gross, no matter who's involved in it. I was let down to see it, no matter who's involved in it. It's a shame. I come from a family of veterans. I have very close friends that have also suffered the same and have lost friends that served. So there's a very personal thing for me, along with a lot of people, I'm guessing you included, about this type of topic. So to see that last night and to see the story, I was just let down. I mean, look, it's no secret I'm skeptical about David Grusch's bigger claims, but to start wielding this PTSD diagnosis in the past and that whole history, I think is wrong. And I hope that whatever powers that be that have some kind of control to figure out how this all transpired, I hope they take over and try and figure it out, because it's a shame. I mean, it shouldn't be involved in this conversation. I don't think that type of I'm not a psychologist, a psychiatrist. I'm not a doctor. But I don't think that plays a role here, or at the very least, I don't think it plays a role for the public to start consuming that. If investigators feel that are looking into this, that there is a medical reason to look at a history like that, that's on them. But I don't think it's for public consumption, and I was let down to see it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I felt the same. I was surprised. And I mean, just for David Grusch, he handled it so well, I thought. I mean, he's basically a proponent for transparency. He's just putting himself out there now. You look on the thumbnails just across YouTube is, David Grusch's face with aliens, just countless countless thumbnails. I think he's really just sacrificed, obviously, at least his private life. His medical records have been leaked out now, and he's handling it, like he said, as a thought leader. I think he said. But you mentioned, and you've said before that you're not sure about Grusch's claims or the big claims he's making. What is your main thoughts on that? If you could just say it quickly, I guess, for our audience.
Yeah, I mean, quickly, look, anybody who comes out with a story like that is interesting to me. You'll always catch my ear. But after then, someone like me, and I'm just speaking for myself here, here's the story. What next? And I would love to see the people that he's talking to under oath. That's that accountability part of it. Like, okay, if you're coming forward with these stories, don't necessarily conduit them through someone else, but rather let's hear it. Let's get that evidence. Let's get that testimony on the record. And I understand there's anonymous concerns here and reasons for anonymity. I get all that. That's fine. But where I become a little bit skeptical is, and it goes to the root of the original story, which then was also brought up in the News Nation interview, or they've done so many pieces. I know that it was at least in a couple, and it was also brought up in the hearing. And that was the DOPSA request that David Grusch submitted to see and ensure that anything he were to come out with was not classified. And that's an important and actually required step for him to do. Kudos to David Grusch for accurately conveying that in the hearing. I think with respect to the Congresswoman, Anna Paulina Luna, she was a little bit, I think, mistaken on what the DOPSA review and approval meant. So I don't mean to be disrespectful there. I just think that she had the wrong impression of what it meant. So my credit goes to David Grusch for really correcting, I think, where he said, I had to do that. And they're also just looking for security concerns. So with that said, it surprises me that any reviewer in a position like DOPSA would see something like this. And even though, and I want to stress this, that they are not read in to a secret program like this, that their channels that they have to extend out to ensure that no classified information is in whatever they are reviewing, they would be able to hit somebody like that would be cleared. And DOPSA would then just get a word like, no, this is not cleared for open publication, but they wouldn't be told what the program is, what part of what was submitted that was classified. That's essentially how DOPSA works. I've made quite a few requests on various DOPSA reviews. Luis Elizondo's included when he got the videos reviewed for, at the time, what he wanted to use for the DoD. So I'm familiar with the process in that respect. And so it's very hard for me to believe that they would look at that, and in whatever this request was, obviously, according to the story, everything we read in the debrief article and everything in the News Nation article, or articles and video piece, was approved to be talked about by the DoD because it wasn't classified. So that's what we are told. My question mark is, what was in the request then? We're led to believe certain things were in there, but we don't know. And they haven't released that request yet. There's no reason to not release it. And although that may sound like kind of pointless, it goes to the heart of why Congresswoman Luna said what she did. It goes to the heart of why the debrief reported reference to the DOPSA review, and it goes to the heart of the News Nation saying the same. So I think that we should see what the DoD looked at. Were bodies really in there? Was the non-human craft not only in there, because I think it was on the first page that News Nation flashed, but like how much detail were in there? How many details were in there? And that's what I think we should see, to see exactly what the DoD saw. But the bottom line is, and again, I can just see the hate mail already, like, wow, that's nitpicking. Who cares? We have this information. Well, the reason why we should care is the same reason that the debrief, the News Nation pieces, and Congressman Luna made reference to it, because it was important. So if it's cleared for public release, there's no reason not to release it. And the fact that they're not releasing it is kind of questionable to me.
And when you say questionable, because you said that they've already locked down on UAP information. I follow you on X, and saw that several months ago you were saying that now you're not getting anything. You're not getting any FOIA requests back. You're not getting anything back. Why do you think they're locking down? Why aren't they sharing the DOPSA request like you mentioned?
Well, they keep in mind it's I've already got a request into the DoD to share it. I haven't been denied yet. So at this point, it would be David Grusch and or his attorney that would be responsible for releasing it. They could. There's no reason not to. Again, there's nothing stopping them. To make one very quick point, that I could have accepted maintaining that under lock and key if one day he were to testify in front of Congress. But now we know he already did that. And the reason I say that is, if he was holding on to certain things to tell Congress under oath, okay, fine, I wouldn't like it, but I would accept something like that. Now he's testified. So for me, I can't think of a reason why we should not see it. And that concern, I think, is not seeing what David Grusch submitted to the DoD, but I just don't see let's say it's all in there, the bodies, the non-human craft, and so on. If all of that is in there, it's a big stretch for me to think that DOPSA and the whole point of their job is to look out for security concerns, to think that they just missed it, or they just said, oh, this is probably BS. Who cares? Yeah, signed off. I would love to know if that's ever happened. And I've asked around, is there any DOPSA whoopsie moment where they got a request, they thought it was so outlandish, they signed off on it, said, yeah, talk whatever you want, and it turned out to be a classified program? I've yet to see a mistake by that arm, and they were founded, I think, sometime in the 1950s or something like that. So they've been around for over a half a century, and I haven't found any mistake like that. So there's obviously the argument this is so classified that they don't know and their channels don't know, so they had no idea that it was classified, so they signed off on it. I don't believe that. I mean, if that were actually true, I don't believe David Grusch would be out in the open. I think that secrets like that are kept, and they're kept well, and they're kept for a long time. Is this that one time that the secrecy wall's breaking a little bit and we're seeing the absolute truth that we have non-human craft and bodies? Maybe, and I'll give it that opportunity. I have not a problem to do that, but we just need a little bit more at this point.
I see. So if let's say he released that David Grusch, say he watches this and he decides he's going to release that, and it has all that information in. Would that support or add more credibility to his claims in your mind?
Well, it depends on what's in there. And again, I just stress that DOPSA is not a fact-checking arm of the DoD. Yeah. So he can make a fictionalized story. The example I've used in the past is a children's book, educating a fictionalized alien story, utilizing DoD, sometimes facts and figures in there. He would have to have that reviewed also. So there's no fact check here. There's no endorsement by the DoD. So it will come down to what's in it. And I think that new questions will be raised by it. I believe. I could be wrong. And if it's all in there, great. But then the question will be, how logical is it that DOPSA would miss this, or the people that they reached out to? Because look, I know that they're not going to be read into everything. I know that, but they know that too. And that's why they would reach out. So if David Grusch in this submission were to name a organization or arm / component of the DoD or the CIA or whomever he's going to name, right, that's entwined in this story, they have channels to go out and verify that and ask those questions. Mm-hmm. So would it change the validity for me? Probably not. But I say that not knowing what's in it. So let's see what's in it first and then start asking the new questions.
I guess, yeah, how I would come back, or how I think of it, is that when WikiLeaks came out, basically, I was in the Air Force, and we were not allowed. We were instructed, directed, ordered not to go to WikiLeaks, because if we're looking through WikiLeaks and we stop on something, then that could show that it is, we verify it, essentially. If you have foreign agents that are looking at our web traffic, and we have all these service members going to a certain web pages now, that would lead them to believe that maybe it's more credible. Wouldn't that give it away? If he released it, let's say he put all those things in, the bodies, the craft, and then it comes back that is not allowed for release. Wouldn't that be a dangerous position for the government? Because now that they have verifiable proof, again, it would be through Grusch and his lawyer. But couldn't that confirm then that, this is a classified program because they took this out of the DOPSA request?
Well, then it would be on Grusch and his lawyer to release that, knowing that they would be releasing classified information, and then the public would have that confirmation. So yes, but I know that DOPSA doesn't. They don't stamp everything that comes to them. So I think that's a risk that's based on his oath that he took, security clearance that he holds, and all of that. That if he were to spew classified information out into the open, there would be huge repercussions to that. So I've never been on board with the idea that the government says, okay, let's just let them talk about it, because if we don't let them, that's confirmation. And I think history shows that. I mean, there have been people that have been prosecuted in the past for talking about heavily classified programs in the past. You look at the leaks about stealth technology and stuff like that in the past. There's been a lot of people that have been prosecuted for that. You brought up WikiLeaks. That's another kind of very interesting aspect of the way you look at this, to where that's what happens to people who leak true classified information. Now, I know that Grusch got clearance to talk about this type of stuff, but let's face it, if this stuff was absolutely genuine, it would be at some of the highest classification levels that we know. And we know this just by looking at how security works. We look at the classification guide on UAP, where the majority of it is redacted because the majority about UAP is classified now. And you look at that, you have to see that if they truly have non-human craft, if they truly have non-human bodies of pilots, biologics, and anything like that to prove any shadow of a doubt this is not made by human hands, I believe the evidence is there to show that this would be classified. And yet, according to the DoD, it's not. So if there were things that could be cited throughout history to show that the government allowed people to talk about things just to make sure that the secret wasn't out, I'd be interested in hearing about that. But I don't think that history shows that they do that. That would be my only respectful rebuttal to the idea.
Okay. And I mean, you've been in this game for a very long time. What is your impression? Do you think there is an actual crash retrieval program? Do you think there are materials found that could be from off-world?
Well, this is what's interesting about material. There are documents that have come out through FOIA that support that there are pieces of something from UAP. Back in the 1940s, they described it as a flying saucer. There are actually photographs from the U.S. Army files. In the CIA files from the 1970s, there is a piece of material of some kind that years after Project Blue Book ended was put in front of a CIA scientist, and his recommendation, his or her, the names were redacted, but the recommendations to the 2 CIA agents that brought it in was redacted. So there's proof there that there is material being retrieved somehow and connected to UAP over the decades. All verify those instances are all verifiable, all from official documents. So I think to answer your question, the answer is yes. I mean, I think that evidence shows that. Project Moondust is another example from history that they went out. Primarily, they were rescuing old to today's standards, but present day Soviet satellites at the time, other type of space vehicles that would come and crash, and they would go out and retrieve it. I know that's not what you're referring to, but the reason I bring up Project Moondust is that it was alleged that during that process where they would go and retrieve stuff that came in from the upper atmosphere or beyond, that it was not attributable to a Soviet launch or anything to that respect. So there are documented records that show that, yeah, absolutely, they're retrieving something. Whether or not then it's non-human or alien, look, I don't have that type of documentation to support it. And I'm the type of person that needs to see to believe, but that's just me. So I can't answer that part of it. And I think that that's why I would love to push on the 40-ish people that David Grusch has talked to come out. And if the government denies this, right? If Congress says, look, we investigated it and there's nothing there. If the government agencies are saying, look, there's nothing here, we're not hiding it, then I would hope that one of those 40 will just come out with it. You know, just come out with a piece of something, even if it's the analyses of it, any type of scientific something rather that people much smarter than me can look at and go, oh, wow. Okay, then that's what they have. Because again, if the government is just lying through their teeth, I don't buy that if they come out and show that information and it turns out the government was lying through their teeth, that they will turn around, put them in cuffs and throw them in jail. And I know that some people will say, well, they're not going to take that chance. But think of the anarchy in the world that would happen if somebody came out with undeniable proof of a non-human species visiting this planet after the government was adamantly denying it. Do you think that they would really turn around and prosecute that person? And my answer is no, I don't think that they would. And it's for the simple reason that you can't justify the classification or secrecy around proof of alien life. I don't believe that you can. You can justify top secret platforms like spy tech, like stealth programs, stuff like that. That's all justified for obvious national security reasons. In my opinion, and I'm not an attorney either, but I would take up that case myself. And I would argue in a court of law that you cannot justify the secrecy behind a undeniable proof of extraterrestrial life visiting this planet. So then for the government to turn around and to try and prosecute somebody for that, for showing proof of what the government has denied, I don't buy it. I don't think it. So that said, I'm stepping ahead a little bit. That's what I would love to see moving forward is play that. If the government wants to play hardball right back. If you've got the proof, then show it. Because I think that in this day and age, if somebody wants to really sneak that out and really say, hey, look, there is proof here of off-world vehicles, they can do it. And you look at Dr. Eric Davis as a prime example. Look, I'm skeptical about him too. I think there's a laundry list of reasons on why we should be. But he went to the New York Times and he says, we have these off-world vehicles. Well, you know what? I've often said it's time to put up or shut up. Now's the time, right? If he's got that proof, There's got to be something up here that he can put out into the open to disprove what the government's rebuttal is to that. But we don't see that. So I think that the short way of saying it is we need that next step of evidence. We need for Congress to turn up the heat. We need accountability from the agency heads. And if all of that fails, then we need somebody to come out into the open with some kind of undeniable evidence. And I hope they do.
And there's been a lot of mention of government contractors, basically that a lot of this technology has been sparsed out. And the idea is for them to also study it, et cetera. But then it also removes that from any sort of FOIA requests, or removes those materials or evidence or whatever it is from the government, meaning the government may not even necessarily, know about this because now it's been parceled out to a contractor. Would that actually, how would that work? Would that keep it completely secret from your FOIA requests, et cetera? Do you have any insight into contractors?
Yeah, a little bit. And I think that this is a big misconception on how the public wants to see that all of this would be farmed out, and so we'll never get our hands on it, and FOIA is useless. And the reason why I say the public wants it that way is then it becomes easier to believe that there's some alien craft being hidden in Raytheon's building or Lockheed Martin's. The problem, though, is when contractors come in to do work, like contractors, not grantees, but contractors, they are contracted to do something specifically for the U.S. government. In this case, the example is working on alien craft or reverse engineering or whatever it might be. That contract is created. Now, it is fair to say that the majority of what that contractor does internally will be off limits to FOIA. But in any contract, there's going to be deliverables. That's true for any contract, again, unless it's a grant. So any contractor that gets awarded this contract in secret to do all of this, sure, a lot of their internal memoranda, emails, stuff like that are not touchable by FOIA. But they still have to turn over those deliverables. And those deliverables, although may be classified when they're turned in, those become FOIA-able. And so who then is the contractor doing the contracted work with extraterrestrial or non-human technology? That's number one where you got to start. But number two is who gave them the contract? CIA, NSA, DOD, whomever. That's the second part of trying to figure that out. So we can absolutely think like, well, all of that, no matter what, is off limits to FOIA because it's so highly classified. And that's fine. That could be true. But to think that they have to hide it in the private sector to circumvent FOIA, I don't see that, because things become FOIA-able the minute they are turned over to the U.S. government. A prime example of that is BASS, Bigelow Aerospace's subsidiary that did OSAP. And the FOIA can't touch BASS. We all know that. That's not a government entity. And yet I've got a pile of BASS emails that I received under FOIA. Now, why is that? And it's because that the contract that they did, or the communications, I should say, not a contract, but communications with the FAA trying to get their UFO office, I guess, when it came to BASS, into the FAA flight manuals for pilots to report their sightings, all become FOIA-able. And although I understand that that's a much different example than working on alien spacecraft, my point is that the moment something crosses the line into a government agency, it becomes FOIA-able, whether it's classified or not. So you can still touch it. So it's hard for me to believe that argument that things are completely locked up in the private sector. And to close that thought, I actually don't think that if the government has these off-world vehicles, they're giving them to the private sector. I think that they will be in government-run buildings and institutions and facilities, hidden well beyond even the touch of a Lockheed or a Raytheon. But that's just my 2 cents based on an opinion and nothing else. And
Grusch has also mentioned the IRAD program. It's the I think it's Innovation, Research, and Development. I'm sorry if I'm missing the I.
Yeah.
Program.
Very briefly, not enough to speak too educated on it, but I'm familiar with what he was saying and how funds were illegally, I think, diverted and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've tried to read. That was the first time I'd heard of it when he mentioned the IRAD program at the hearing, I think, with Moskowitz. And I've read about it since then, but it seems like it's a way to, I just thought of it when you mentioned those contract deliverables. It seemed like a way for corporations to actually go in a certain direction with their research. So basically come up with an idea that they think the government will like in the future, and start actually put funds towards that research in the assumption that they will be paid in arrears, basically, is kind of the impression I got. So that came to my mind as you mentioned there is, getting from under the sort of deliverable, keeping it out of FOIA requests if that's part of their strategy, et cetera.
Yeah, from what I understand about it, though, eventually, if it became a government interest and it was later contracted and stuff like that, again, you would have something that would be transferred from the private sector to the government, paid for by taxpayer dollars, which essentially becomes FOIA-able. Now, I will say FOIA is not perfect. It's not the end all be all. I've never claimed either point. So I will say that there's always going to be a way for them to hide it. But I think that, again, that private sector argument is one that does not fully hold water in my view. But it is often misconstrued out there that once it goes to the private sector, it's completely off limits. Nobody will ever touch it. I just don't see that that's true. One last point, too, on that concept that the private sector would get all of this. I think that a lot of people also don't think about the security concerns that with something like this that go along with spreading it out there to the private sector, because there becomes a lack of control by the U.S. government to control access to that. I get it. Contractors are heavily cleared. They've got their security clearances. I've got all that. I know that part of it. But my only argument about something like an alien spacecraft is that now you're putting that out there and broadening the amount of leaks that can happen on something that I would consider the biggest secret that the U.S. government would want to hold. So if they really have it, I truly believe it's one of the biggest secrets and highest classification levels, so to speak, that they would have. I don't know if you would agree with that, but I mean, that's how I would view it. So by broadening the scope of people that know about it, you now are potentially creating all those separate holes for a potential leak. And I think that they would want to maintain it as much as possible. Not to pull a page from a Hollywood movie, but you look at Independence Day. I mean, that's more how I kind of see it, where you have teams that are highly secluded in government-run facilities that are not a Lockheed Martin or a Raytheon in a building in Pasadena somewhere, but rather this is something under extreme lock and key in a government facility that will never see the light of day. So a lot of speculation there. I totally get it. But I think that we have to consider the implications that as they broaden this out and give it to more and more people, that is a much bigger risk to them. And I don't think the U.S. government would want to do that.
Yeah, I even envision, I agree with you as well on the seclusion of it. That's a great point on not giving it to, your corporate world. I imagine there's nothing digital, in my mind, I think it's all paper. Any of the evidence that they have, I'm guessing would be paper. I have a friend, he actually is the director of a nuclear power plant. And it's interesting, in nuke power plants, they can't have any digital equipment, so they had to actually invent all of these kind of gauges that only work on, pressure or steam, fully analog. So inside of an actual nuclear reactor, I don't know how far out it needs to go. There's no digital anything. You can't have anything digital. It's all completely analog to avoid, I guess, EMP attacks, something like that. To where, they're very innovative in creating these new analog technologies. So in my mind, like you mentioned, I totally agree. I think this will be right up there next to our deepest nuclear secrets. And that was mentioned, I think, in the National Defense Authorization Act. The draft you mentioned is that they were using nuclear weapons, basically, or some part of nuclear weapons, that they don't have to actually declare that to the Congress. So I totally agree. I think it would be right up there next to our deepest secrets on nuclear weapons. And my own guess is, like, you can't have anything digital in a nuclear power plant. I bet it's just paper. They have like two copies in those secluded kind of areas that you're mentioning. Again, this is all just speculation, but just my thoughts as you were talking about that.
Yeah. But they're important to think about just because of the implications of what's being alleged here. I think that that's where speculation comes into play, and where it's important is, would they do certain things like this? And I think they're important questions to ask.
And I guess just kind of final question here as we're wrapping up. Thanks again so much for your time, John.
Of course.
So what do you think? Let's say in the next 6 months we get one of these witnesses, like you mentioned. He says, you know what, I have the evidence. I'm gonna just go for it. He releases it. What do you think that would be the effect on the world? How do you see this changing our discourse?
Well, it's a phenomenal question. If that proof came out and it was undeniable, honestly, I kind of view it two ways. One, the world wouldn't change because the majority of the people still wouldn't care. I hate to say it that way, but I think that there's partial truth to that. However, I think I lean towards the world not being ready. You do have a lot of implications behind this, that world religions are not ready. And look, it's not a popular viewpoint. There's a lot of people that are into the UFO topic that say that's an old argument, the whole War of the World scenario, that the world isn't ready. Well, that's the UFO community, however, that primarily is rebutting that. When you go out and talk to people that are not part of that they see 30, 60-second news pieces, sometimes if they're lucky 4 or 5 minutes, if you watch News Nation entire programs. But regardless, the majority of people are not seeing what people like you and I are, people that are really actively engaged, interested, and try and stay on top of it. Keyword being try, because there's so much out there. But regardless, we are in it. The majority of the world is not in it. And that's where I think then that fear by the powers that be of losing control, of realizing that these craft are powered by something that none of us can combat. We can't chase it. We can't catch it. We can't likely not destroy it, which means that we, the United States, America, who prides themselves on being number one of everything, is not anymore. And in fact, humanity is not number one anymore. That we went to the moon, big deal. These guys are going across solar systems, And I think the idea behind that is terrifying to a lot of people. I stress, not your audience, not me, not you, but the majority of people out there, the people that again, if they're lucky, they see a couple-minute piece on this that's largely inaccurate anyway. I mean, let's face it, the media is not great on reporting on this. So my guess is if they do have any foundation whatsoever, that it's probably not even accurate at all. So you're going to have a lot of reaction like that. And I think that is the national security concern here, that we can't be number one anymore. And that's bad to this day and age. I mean, when you lose control, when the public loses control, bad things happen. And when you look at the last couple of years, not to turn it to COVID or political, but the public lost control in certain areas. We were mandated to do certain things. I know that's different than finding out about extraterrestrials, but my point is the control, the freedoms that we have to be human, and that we can walk around and we're, pretty much the biggest animal in the zoo. We're not anymore if something like that happens. During COVID, we lost some of that freedom, and you look at how people reacted. It wasn't good. And I think that you have to use that as a gauge on where society is right now and how young the human race really is, how much farther we have to go. Again, present company excluded, your audience excluded, but the majority of the planet probably couldn't handle it as well as UFO X, however you say it now. But they wouldn't be able to handle it as well. And I think that is the root of the concern. As dated as that argument sounds, I think that really is at play.
Oh, yeah, great points. I agree. It's all fear-based. And yeah, I mean, I was an F-16 pilot for 18 years, pretty dangerous job. And it's taken me over 2.5 years just to, like you mentioned, get to this point, and there is still fear, why, if it is true, why are they here? Why has it been kept secret for so long? Yeah, so I fear just is definitely a main theme.
Yeah, and if I can add just one more point, I think beyond the fear about extraterrestrials and not being alone and that whole thing, you're going to have a wave of concern about what are world governments lying about as well.
Yeah.
And that's where that concern comes in, because it's not all about aliens and finding out we're not alone in the cosmos. That's only one aspect to it. Because really put your mindset in, if the government said, okay, for more than 50, 60, 70 years, we have been lying to you throughout generations, through different elected leaders, politicians, so on. We've all been in on it, and we have held this truth from you. But okay, we'll admit now you're not alone. The reaction from that already went over, but then it's you're going to have a moment where you go, wait a minute, what about all this other stuff that could be going on? What about the conspiracies about mind control? We know MK Ultra was real, but the government claimed all those experiments stopped. What if they didn't? What if the directed energy weapon conspiracy theories are all true? What if chemtrail theories are all true? I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And that is, whether true or not, it doesn't matter. But the idea then is planted into society, into the world society, that world governments are continuing to lie to us about all these other things. And it's a matter of time. So we have to push for answers on those too. And you're going to have, again, that anarchy. So there's a domino effect thing, I think, that goes along with it. That's not just alien finding out we're not alone, but it's much bigger.
Wow. Excellent. And for anyone who, I guess, public interest, people want to get into a deeper dive on transparency and UFOs, what advice would you give them?
Ask questions, ask a lot of questions. That is my biggest piece of advice. That, and be patient, because there's so much out there. It's overwhelming. And sadly, there's also a lot of provable BS that goes along with it. And so to navigate that takes a lot of patience. But never be afraid to ask questions at all, and be weary of those who don't want you to ask, because I think that that's sorely needed in this conversation. It's the only way we learn, is by asking questions, and that would be those would be my two pieces of advice: ask questions, and then just be as patient as you can.
Awesome. Well, you've certainly asked a lot of questions over the years. Now have 3 million documents. And I think you've been pretty patient since you started when you were 15, at least. So yeah, thanks again for coming, John. Thanks for all your work. Like I said, for anyone, audience, I'm a patron of John's. I enjoy all his background stuff, so I'd recommend going to join his Patreon, and at the least check out his videos on the Black Vault on YouTube. So thank you so much, John, for being here.
I appreciate that, and thank you for your support, by the way, and definitely thank you for your service to the country. But thank you.
Yeah, definitely. With pleasure. Thank you.